Erev Tov Halon. Good morning in Toledo. Greetings to everybody. My name is Wayne Firestone. On behalf of all of my friends and colleagues here at the American Israel Friendship League, we are grateful to have you all together midweek for a art talk. Nothing like a walk through a virtual gallery with Gabriela. We will get there in a moment. Man, she has stuff she promises that is both fun and accessible. What more could you ask for in the middle of summer when, heat waves and weird things, floods and all kinds of plagues going on? We're going to make your life a little more fun and exciting. And we're glad to have everybody here with you. First, we always like to ask something just to sort of warm the crowd up a little bit. So let's start with summer movies. Do you have a summer movie recommendation? Something you're watching on streaming, something you're watching on the big screen, on the little screen, on the medium-sized screen, something you just want to share that, hey, this is worth watching. And yes, bonus points if by any definition it's an art film, we'll give you extra bonus points for that recommendation. So go ahead, tell somebody the film that you've seen, just gotta see it. I'm gonna say Asteroid City. Anything by Wes Anderson for me is magical. Loved it. You can't go wrong. But that's my taste. Put whatever you want in there. Gabriela, art is about taste. Movies is about taste. Some people love the master. Some people don't. Some obscure artists make it out there, even defying all the odds. Tell us about the three fun and accessible artists that we're going to get to meet today in the middle of summer. I know they're very different artists, but you have this magical touch about putting people together in our virtual gallery that other people wouldn't otherwise really even get to experience.
Thanks, Wayne. Thanks for the invitation. I'll tell you what I was watching just yesterday, not an art movie at all, but one of the funniest movies I've seen in a long time, rewatching, is Burn After Reading with George Clooney and Frances McDormand and Brad Pitt, and it's hilarious. It's streaming. I can't remember where I streamed it, but it's so good. And they're all like make fun of the characters that they've played in other movies, really. It's a Coen Brothers movie. Anyway, really, really fun.
Yay for Coen Brothers.
So thanks everybody for joining us today. Yeah, so we're going to be visiting three exhibitions that are all very, very recent from New York, two in galleries and one at the Guggenheim Museum. We're going to start with a fashion photographer who became so huge that he became not only one of the most influential fashion photographers, but really one of the most influential photographers, period, of the last century. And we see his influences everywhere: film, TV, movies, fashion, and art. And then we're going to see one of our oldest working artists in the US, Alex Katz, who is still painting at 94. And he just had a retrospective at the Guggenheim Museum, and he's been painting portraits. You could say he's been painting the same painting for decades, but he is also an incredibly influential artist. And a lot of you are going to see his work, even if you've never heard of him before, and kind of recognize it because it has been so influential. And then we're going to see a young artist named Daniel Gordon, who is something between a photographer and a sculptor and a painter, or at least he thinks about painting, and see how influences from the past kind of manifest themselves in young artists' work today. So that's just a little bit of kind of an intro to what we're going to do, but we can dive right in. So I won't be looking at the comments while I'm speaking, just so I can keep the flow going, but Wayne will be, and he will jump in if there's a pressing question I need to answer right away, or if not, at the end, I'm happy to answer any questions any of you have. Just share them in the chat and we'll get to them. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So we start from this exhibition called Avedon 100 that was recently shown at Gagosian Gallery in Chelsea. Gagosian Gallery, just to give you a context for those of you who don't visit New York galleries very often, Gagosian Galleries is one of the biggest and strongest, by which I mean richest, most influential galleries in the world, in New York, but also globally. They are a global gallery. The artists that they represent, or the estates of the artists that they represent, like in this case, are some of the most famous artists in the world and show in museums. They're in museum collections. They show in biennials. And they have galleries all over the world. So they are what we call, in New York, we call them the mega galleries. There are about 4 of them, and Gagosian is one of them. And what's special about these galleries for our purposes is that they are often able, because they have such resources, such deep pockets, such connections with both institutions and private collectors, that they can put together museum level shows that even museums can't put together because of their connections and because of what they're able to do. And that is really what this show is, in my opinion. So it's called Avedon 100, Avedon for Richard Avedon, and 100 because when the show opened in May would have been Avedon's 100th birthday. So here's little baby, well, Avedon is the little boy and his baby sister with his mom and dad. He was born in New York in 1923. The Avedons actually owned a department store in New York at the Avedon building, and were kind of, you know, upper middle class family in New York. They traveled a lot. Avedon's first love, you could say, in a way, as a photographer, was his sister. Here she is in Paris. And he always said she was just the most beautiful, elegant thing. And we were always all just taking pictures of her. And so he was very attached to her, both as a kind of a young artist, a young photographer, and of course, as her big brother. But the tragedy of her life was that she became mentally ill very, very young, died young at a psychiatric institution, and was really always this kind of a tragic figure in Avedon's life. So he both grew to love her and admire her and really feel her pain and her humanity. And I'm telling you this because I think this approach from a very young age to beautiful women and their humanity is something that will later really inform his work. So here are 2 pictures that open the show. These are both self-portraits of Avedon at different ages, as you can tell. What's nice curatorially about this work, it had over 150 pictures in it. And the way that they curated it, because you can imagine that as a fashion photographer, an art photographer, he was the house photographer for both Vanity Fair and Vogue for many, many years. There was a lot to choose from. And what the gallery did is they didn't curate it themselves. They invited 150 people from the art world, from fashion, from photography, from his life, from his family, to each choose their one favorite Avedon picture. And that is how they curated the show. So each picture was in the label, you could see not only when the picture was from or who it was of, but also who selected it. So some people selected, let's say, a portrait that was really touching to them. One of these portraits was selected by Avedon's son. And some people selected their own portraits that he took, like Hillary Clinton picked out her own portrait that he took. So everybody came at it from a different angle. One of the other photographs that opens this show, as you can see, is this giant, what Avedon called his mural photograph series, which he did in the 60s. As you can see, they're not exactly murals. They're not painted on the wall, but they are the scale of murals. Remember, Avedon always photographed on film. He didn't work digitally. And all his photographs were printed in the lab, meaning these giant things. And here I have a few more angles of this photograph. This is, by the way, a group portrait of Allen Ginsberg's family. Allen Ginsberg is in the center there, the Beat poet. The way he would stage these photographs is he would tape the side of the stage of wherever he was shooting, the background. On the floor, he would put tape, and he would tell the group of people that he had invited, this is where the frame starts and ends. You guys figure it out. Find your space in there. And he said what he loved was seeing people kind of jostle each other, find their own spot in the frame. Who wants to be in the back? Who wants to be in the front? Who wants to be in the center? Who wants to be in the side? Who sits next to whom? Who stands next to whom? And remember that all these photographs were printed in the black and white room and in the dark room. And you can see they really are the materiality of them. These are photographic prints that he, did in the big plastic tubs with the chemicals. They're really technical masterpieces as well as artistic ones. And this photo is called Family. So he had a lot of ways of creating groups of people or groups of figures in his characters. This is one of his most famous ones. He had a photo shoot with Marilyn Monroe, and he took multiple exposures of her and then manually put them together. So he projected the image next to another image next to another image in the darkroom. Again, this is not Photoshop. He did all this in the darkroom of Marilyn kind of being Marilyn, right? He said there was the flirting and the being very big and being very seductive and being funny and that kind of humanity that she had to her, sensuality. And the way he would often work with his figures, there's one picture that captures him at work. This is him working. He would dance and jump and run around his figures just as much as he expected them to when he was working with his small camera. And you can see how it's really, this is a woman who's dancing with someone. This is a woman who's responding to someone, not just the camera, but the person behind it. But the most famous thing about this photo shoot is, and this is a story that Avedon tells, when he was done shooting, they did all the shots, she did all the things, everyone was taking a break. He saw her in the corner and she was sitting in the corner, and he comes up to her with his camera around his neck and he said, I didn't say anything, but I saw that she saw me. And she didn't turn away, and she gave me a tacit agreement to capture her like this. And so I did. And this became one of Marilyn Monroe's most famous portraits, also known as Sad Marilyn, that so much captures how we think of Marilyn Monroe today, right? Where she was both this kind of glamour icon, but also a tragic figure behind it. And remember the story I was telling you about Avedon and his sister, right? A way to capture both the beauty and the humanity of these iconic women that he photographed throughout his career. And the issue of consent here, I think, is very important with Avedon. He came up in a world where didn't have the same ethics that we are trying to, as a culture, we are trying to enforce more and more on how women are treated, especially in the media, fashion, film world, right? This is way before Me Too. Here's a man who had a lot of power as a very influential photographer. And the issue of consent, of collaborating with with the women he shot, of not being kind of a paparazzi style photographer where he just jumps up and captures whatever he can. This was central to his work. To work with them, to see his subjects as people was crucial for him. And I think that's really what got him the amazing photographs that it did get him. So as you can see, the exhibition was hung kind of salon style, hundreds of pictures in this show. We're going to look at some of the most iconic ones, the ones that I chose as representing a few very important things in his career. So here's a photo from the Versace collection of the 90s, featuring some of the biggest names. You can see Cindy Crawford there in the middle, the Versace collection from 94, 95. And of course, there's a very kind of humorous, you could say maybe feminist take on here the women are dressed and very much recognizable, and the men are the naked pedestals. So it's both a very artistic and sensual picture, but also kind of funny and kind of feminist. And this was chosen by Donatella Versace. Here she is with J.Lo for the exhibition. Another of his color photographs, he didn't only shoot in black and white, featuring some of the biggest models of the 90s. This is a picture that he shot with Nastasia Kinski and turned into a poster, and actually sold over 1 million of these posters and made a lot of money on this project. And he tells the story of shooting with this snake. And he says, you know, it looks like such a perfect picture and it looks so easy. But he said, she was lying down on that cement floor for 2 hours on that cold cement floor as we were trying to get this, the snake. And by the way, this was Kinski's idea to do a photo shoot with the snake. And he said, and I was trying to get it, and I was trying to get it. And then at some point I saw the snake was coming over to her. And I said, okay, whatever you do, just relax your face. And the snake came over and kissed her ear. And he says, and I did what I needed to do, and Nastasia did what she needed to do, and the snake did what he needed to do. And we all rose to the occasion together, and I got the shot. And this is something he always says about his pictures, about coming together and finding something together. And what he looks for in the picture is always that moment where everyone rises to the occasion. Before we keep going, I brought you a short video of Avedon speaking about his work and what he looks for, just to kind of give you an idea of who this guy was. So here's 1 minute with Richard Avedon. There we go.
What happens to me is that in work, I look for something in a face, and what I look for is contradiction, complexity, things that are contradictory and at the same time connected. There was one time when the face was like an explosion. For years, it was this explosion. And when an explosion happens, you don't know where it's going to fly, where it's going to go, where the teeth are going to be, where the eye is going to be, what the contradictions are going to be within the face. Is this the laugh cynical? Is it ironic? Is it pain? Is it a scream? Is it all this concerned me, didn't concern me, just overtook me. And they were all facets of my feelings at that time, those years, that month, that day. Then later, very quiet, just very quiet. Everything needed to be very quiet, very uncomposed, very unexplosive. And I start by doing absolutely nothing. Don't have an idea in your head, just look right on the camera.
That was Avedon giving a master class in this last shot in portrait photography. But it's interesting what he says about, as a younger photographer, as a younger man, he was always looking for that kind of unexpected contradiction, action. And then as he became older, both as a photographer and as a person, he starts to take things out of the equation. This is a photograph of Charlize Theron and Patty Jenkins, who is, Charlize Theron is obviously a superstar actress, and Patty Jenkins is a director, who both of their kind of huge breaks came when Patty directed Charlize Theron in the movie Monster. So in Monster, Charlize Theron, who up until that moment was kind of a sex icon, really, one of the, you know, the big blondes of Hollywood. She would always be cast as a love interest and as kind of like the knockout. She gained many, many pounds, shaved her eyebrows, completely changed her look, and portrayed a monster, a serial killer. And that really made a huge difference in both Patty Jenkins' career, who later went on to direct bigger and bigger and bigger films, in films that were traditionally given to male directors, but also to Theron, who later started getting more complex roles and not always pigeonholed into the same kind of characters. And look at this picture. It really looks like Patty Jenkins is at the Metropolitan Museum or something, and she's admiring this perfect sculpture that Charlize Theron is playing, right? We see so much the woman who's used to being looked at and the woman who is always looking, the dressed woman and the nude woman, the muse and the artist. Such a beautiful and evocative picture, I think. This is the picture that Hillary Clinton picked that I told you about, a portrait of her by Avedon. This is Avedon's one of his most famous pictures of Andy Warhol. You can see here, this is Warhol's torso. We don't see his face. After he recovered from an assassination, from a murder attempt that happened when Valerie Solanas, a woman who was kind of a fan, kind of obsessed, kind of misguided about him, came to his studio and shot him and other people at his studio. These are the scars that were left behind. Here's a better image of that. And this photograph was picked by Jenny Saville, a very famous British painter, who also deals a lot with figures and something between beauty and ugliness, between something that attracts us and rejects us. He shot a lot of musical legends. Remember what he was saying about the eyes going, who knows where the eyes are going to be, who knows where the face is going to be. This is his portrait of Louis Armstrong, of course, of Bob Dylan. Look at this amazing photograph of Tina Turner. She looks so strong, right? She looks kind of like electricity embodied. He had a whole series of portraits of people who are in professions that are on the margins. He was very interested in people both in the spotlight, the biggest, stars, the Marilyns, the Andy Warhols, etc., and the people who were so in the margins of American society that not a lot of people even knew that they existed. And this is a photograph of a boy who skinned snakes. 13-year-old rattlesnakes skinner. And this picture was selected by Miuccia Prada of Miu Miu. This photo on the right here is one of his most famous photographs from that series of a beekeeper. Ronald Fisher. And Ron Fisher later told in an interview, there was kind of an open call in the newspaper that said they were looking for someone who wasn't afraid of bees. And he was a beekeeper himself. So he showed up for the interview, and he kind of was normally and naturally bald and hairless. And Avedon smeared him with bee pheromones so that the bees would come to him. And he said, and I just stood there and we had a lovely connection and a lovely moment, and he took my picture. But it is kind of a terrifying photograph as well. There was a whole wall of his amazing fashion shoots, but I have to say my favorite one is this one. It is from 1955, and I think it's amazing that this picture, and a lot of his pictures throughout his career, throughout the almost century that he worked, hold up so beautifully. I could see this picture today in any fashion magazine. Dovima with elephants. So Dovima was one of the supermodels of that time, of the 50s and 60s. And when he decided to photograph her, he brought her to a circus, to where they were keeping the elephants. And he said, again, with the animals and the model, he said, we all rose to the occasion. And Dovima stood there in all the elephant dung and all the smelliness, and just was fabulous. And the elephants did what they had to do as well. And I did too, Avedon says. Look at this beautiful, funny and elegant and gorgeous photograph. So there's so much more to see in this exhibition. And we will give you the links so you can see. I'll send you the website for the gallery so you can see a lot of these pictures. The Richard Avedon archives, the estate also has an amazing archive of his photograph that you can peruse online. But this just gave you a little taste of Richard Avedon. So the next show I want to show you, oh, here we are, is Alex Katz's retrospective at the Guggenheim that closed not too long ago. As you can see, it was very well attended. I went on a Tuesday afternoon, totally not a busy day, and it was packed. So as I said, Alex Katz, born in 27, so only 4 years after Avedon, still painting, born in New York, and he now he lives in New York, and he lives in upstate New York as well. This show is called Gathering. And it's a gathering in a way of not just his work throughout the years, but of kind of all his subjects, many of whom he painted over and over throughout his career. And the person that he painted most of all, over 50 years, is his wife, Ada. And that's her here. He's been married to Ada for over 50 years, and he's been painting her for longer than they've been married. And in this painting that kind of opens the exhibition, it's in the lobby. You didn't even have to buy a ticket to see it. You really see a lot of what is the Alex Katz style, which is at once extremely identifiable, right? We know exactly what's being painted. Very flat, almost like a little pop arty, right? It kind of reminds us of pop art in its flatness and its strong colors. But also there's something a little bit subdued, a little bit melancholy, a little bit muted, right? It's not the colors of pop art exactly. And when we get closer to the pictures, we see how much he did with how little, right? Very few brushstrokes. There's whole areas that are just kind of flat color. And look how he gives the shine in the eye, the way the eyeball responds to light reflecting off of it with 3 little dabs. And look at how the raindrops that also kind of look like tears are each this kind of 2 little bits of paint, a little bit of gray, a little bit of white. They're really almost like little abstract pictures. And this is really the Alex Katz style. So he always took from portraits and pop art and abstract, everything together came in his work, But the thing he always painted over and over again were people, always, always people. The show starts from his painting of his mother that he makes at age 19. She was a big star in the Yiddish theater scene. Ella Marion was her stage name. And you can see even here, he's still a teenager, but there's already some of his language in here. There's those flat surfaces, there's that line, a painting that's really more like a drawing more than anything else. And around this time, he's going to art school at the Cooper Union. And on his way to school, he makes sketches on the subway from the 40s. You can see how interested he is in the way people sit in a space, in scenes that are really kind of quotidian, daily scenes. But they always kind of turn into also this abstract painting. This painting is both about people sitting on the subway, but it's also about how that yellow on the bottom and that gray on the top talk to each other, right? So he's a painter. He's thinking about composition and color and shapes, but he's also thinking about people. Now we're getting to the 50s where, the big stars are people like Jackson Pollock, who I'm showing you here, and, the abstract expressionists. And young Alex Katz tries to kind of be influenced by that. He's very inspired by that. So this is his response to Jackson Pollock, right? Something that's kind of like all over the canvas as well. But even here, he can't get away from painting people. It's always, always people for him. So this is just to show you some of his earlier work. And then he starts painting his friends. And this is really in the 50s and 60s where he's really finding his language. And his friends were often the artists and the poets of the downtown scene in New York. Always these figures kind of isolated in the background. And I brought you a lot of pictures with people in front of the work, so you get a sense of the scale, so you get a sense of how these pictures were hung in the museum. And again, there's something that just transcends the years, I think, that feels so immediate, even though these are pictures from, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. Here is what may be one of the first paintings of Ada, of his wife. Look how there's a painting in a painting here. And this is a self-portrait from around the same time. Katz was always very interested in fashion as well. What people were wearing, how they were wearing it, a little scarf here, a little jacket there. And again, a painting that's really very much a drawing as well, right? Like the line is a very important thing here. And Ada again, oh, maybe this came first, is possible. He said one of the things he loved most about Ada when he first met her was her style, how she was always so impeccably dressed. And it turns out that her mother made all her clothes for her for many, many years until her mother passed away. And here's a painting that really shows us this guy is coming up on the 60s, double Ada. And of course, you can't really see this doubling without thinking about Andy Warhol and his Marilyns, right? We're in a time in the art world where artists are starting to think about multiplication of images, of the way images show up in the media. That's what pop art was all about. And this is a painting that very much responds to that. This is many, many Adas in one painting with the little black dress, but all these different expressions, all these different ways to be kind of poised and standing or sitting. And, this is from 1960. It very much reminds me of the Avedon that we just saw, right? And it was made 3 years after the Avedon picture was made. So Alex Katz may have seen it and was responding to it in some way. This is Robert Rauschenberg. And for those who don't know who Rauschenberg is, he's one of the big artists that starts in the 50s and keeps going for many decades later. An artist who used a lot of collage, but also assemblage, meaning collage with three-dimensional objects, who used a lot of images from popular culture, as well as daily life, as well as sometimes the American flag. So when he makes this double portrait of Rauschenberg, it's also kind of a response to Rauschenberg's work. So you can see how this is an artist who's also responding not just to his people and to his friends, but to the art world around him. And one of the things I loved about this show is they displayed these pictures, these cutouts, and this is just a guy who obligingly let me take his picture next to the Frank O'Hara portrait. These are works that are very fragile. The paint is peeling off of them. I've never seen them in person before this exhibition, and it was a moment in which Alex Katz was trying to kind of break out of painting. So he literally cut out his figures and pasted them on wood or on metal surfaces and tried to kind of put them in the space. And I brought a little video for you. The way the museum also stationed these pieces, where sometimes they really looked like people in the space. And you had to get kind of close to them to realize they were cutouts, they were artworks. So you can see how the paint is really brittle there and is cracking. That's not an effect in the painting. That's just the thing peeling. He didn't make them very well in terms of archivability, but they're beautiful works. And the museum really played with them and kind of had them juxtaposed in front of other artworks, have nice shadows cast on the walls, or stand right by the railing of this famous Guggenheim Rotunda, so that you would be, if you saw them from the other side of the space, you would be fooled into thinking they were real people. So because he painted Ada throughout their lives, throughout their marriage, you also see Ada aging slowly and aging very, very beautifully and very elegantly. And he said he was always very influenced by fashion photography. And this particular painting, he talked about it in terms of vintage makeup ads that he saw growing up. And how the way that they made the skin so contrasty, and the way the model would fill the frame. And this is really something he's thinking about when he's making these giant paintings of Ada and other people. Here's another self-portrait a little later too. He's also depicting himself. This picture is called Passing. And when he's talking about passing, he's talking about racial passing as a Jewish person. Maybe he thought that was a particularly non-Jewish hat to wear or something like that. But, it's like, I think it's the closest thing to kind of a political work that he's ever done. There's something about the way later, as his career develops, as his painting develops, he's still painting portraits, very striking portraits, but something that really evolves is the way he cuts his frame. Look at this painting. It's not totally anatomically correct, right? That mouth is way too big. The figure is completely cut off. But what happens is that we are kind of drawn into those eyes. They're in the center. They're looking at us just as much as we're looking at them. This is another example of the way later this picture is from the 90s, the way he starts making irregular shapes of the canvases, how he cuts off both the canvas and the figure painted in them. So he's still very much inside the portrait, but he's always innovating inside of that. Now, the other theme that recurs a lot, and this is just to give you kind of a bird's eye view of what these bigger paintings look like, is landscapes. And you can see he's using the same kind of minimalism and the same kind of big fields of color to depict. For him, it wasn't really about depicting nature. He said it was about depicting light, the way light looks at a certain time of day, in the woods or by the beach. The way light looks in the city. These pictures, these paintings were very influenced by Rudy Burkhart's work, who was a photographer, and Alex Katz knew him and knew of his work and studied it a lot. And we're nearing the top floor of the Guggenheim. As you go up in the spiral, you get closer and closer in time to our present day. Another striking portrait of Ada. And I love taking the picture of these two women next to it because they really reverberate this picture. And he's one of those artists that always, when I come out of one of his exhibitions, suddenly the world looks like an Alex Katz painting to me. And look at the elegance and the minimalism, how much he says with so little. This beautiful woman and the way she has aged and the way her beauty has developed with her age. I find that Ada's look, her eyes are always, she's very generously letting him see her, letting him paint her, but there's also something that she keeps to herself. That little kind of almost like a Mona Lisa smile. A few more of his giant landscapes, again, to show how much he does with so little. I want to show you this black and white painting behind this woman photographing. This is a painting of office windows at night in Manhattan. And all he does is he creates this giant black canvas. And then each window is a smear of white paint and two vertical black paintbrushes across it. And that gives us so much. That creates architecture, that creates light, that creates the darkness of night. Again, how much he did with how little. So the very last painting I'll show you is Ada again. This is one of the very last paintings in the show. Okay, and with that, we'll go to our very last exhibition. So this was Alex Katz at the Guggenheim Museum, and we'll share the links with you as well. Okay. Now to something completely different. We saw two exhibitions by artists who have had a lifetime to make their careers. One of them already passed away. One of them is still living. And this is a show by a young artist named Daniel Gordon. Here he is. He's about 40. He's an up-and-coming photographer, but as you can see, he also makes things. He says about himself, I'm something between photography. I make something between photography, painting, and sculpture. And we'll talk about that. So this is an exhibition he had at Kasman Gallery in Chelsea, New York. Kasman is a very big gallery. They started representing him about a few months ago. And but he's already making headlines. He's already included in some museum shows and a lot of big gallery shows. And what he does really is kind of he tries to reinvent or rethink the still life. The still life, which is one of the oldest, most classical topics in painting. But this is his work, and his work is full on photography. So when we look at this picture, this is a photograph, and we get close up, we see that this clump of grapes is really a bunch of crumpled up pieces of paper, on top of which Daniel Gordon has printed an image of a grape over and over again, and then stuck them to what he was photographing. So these are photographs, but they are photographs of paper sculptures. And these paper sculptures are kind of imitations of a style of painting. So before I go any further, I brought you a short video of Daniel Gordon in his studio, 3 minutes, because I think it'll really help us understand what we are looking at when we see his work and hear him talking a little bit about his work. So here are 3 minutes with Daniel Gordon.
Over the last years, I think my work has become more and more about the blending of different mediums, sculpture, photography, and painting, and kind of trying to find ways where I can make an image that lies somewhere in between all of those. I'm not a technical person, but in a lot of ways my work responds to technology. I was wanting to make still lifes of things that have never been in still lifes before, that are definitely a part of our daily lives, a part of everybody's life in a way. There was no particular plan other than I'm really curious, how do I make a picture of these funny Nike sneakers with more traditional still life elements? I really like the physicality of paper edges and having it feel a little bit clumsy and a little bit funny. You know, for example, like the way this hammerhead could easily have been made in a way that makes it look real. But, you know, I chose to make it feel more like a cartoon, like a version of the thing, not the actual thing. It somehow becomes more personal, more a mine in a way when I remake that object. And once the object is made, that decides how the picture will be made. It's a lot of looking through the lens, changing things in the setup, making something new, adding something, kind of move back and forth to the camera, to the background, to the objects, to make more objects, to make new patterns, to switch this color out. It's really kind of a formal exploration. It comes together in the juxtaposition of these objects in such a way that is harmonious. Even if the objects are ugly or utilitarian or ridiculous, somehow they come together in a way that feels complete.
So I really feel like we have to see that video to really understand how Daniel Gordon works. And he's also so eloquent and he speaks so simply and relatably, I think, about his process. So just to remind us, so this is his studio in Brooklyn. And you can see he makes all these objects. So he'll take a Nike sneaker or a box of tissues or a plant or a piece of fruit, and he will photograph the actual thing, print it in his printer. Sometimes it can be the leaves of a plant. Sometimes it can be a lobster. He often will either photograph things himself, or sometimes he'll find pictures on the internet. And he'll print them, then cut out the print, and either use it flat, like we see in the background here that you saw him tape to his own wall with the glue stick, or he'll wrap it around a paper shape to make it stand on the table and create these still lives. Now, the exhibition was called Free Transform. And Free Transform, for those of you who are not Photoshop nerds like me, is a Photoshop term. So in Photoshop, this is a program that you use to edit images and manipulate images, very widespread. One of the most basic features of Photoshop is a command that's called Free Transform. And when you use Free Transform, basically what that means is you can select a part of an image or a whole image, and you can change the colors in it, or you can blow it up bigger or smaller, or you can change the perspective in which you see it. And that's what it's called, to free transform something. And this exhibition is about that because he started using Photoshop a lot to make this work. He started using, for example, when he makes the background for this picture, he used the original photo that he had taken of this plant and free transformed it in many ways to create the background, which he then printed out, taped to the back wall, and presented his paper sculpture in front of it. Now, another new thing that's happening in this exhibition, and this is really the first time that it's been shown, are his sculptures. So let me show you here. These are three-dimensional sculptures that were in the exhibition. And they're not like the sculptures that he makes for his photographs. For his photographs, this is something that he posted on his Instagram. His sculptures are really one-sided. You're supposed to see them from in this image, the left side, right, from the front. And in the back, there's just a bunch of stuff rolled up and taped together and glued together to make the structure stand up. But the sculptures that he made for the show are three-dimensional sculptures that you can walk all around. Here they are. And here they are in the studio. He went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and other museums and kind of took inspiration from ancient vessels, made them from paper mache and other materials, and then coated his three-dimensional sculptures with colors of paper that he had printed out, either photographed a certain texture or found a texture and a color online and printed that out and then glued it on. So you really get to see his work with paper. And you know how he says he likes things to have the kind of handmade quality. But you know, one of my favorite things about his sculpture that actually goes back to the way that he used to make sculptures for his photographs is his foray, that's small so far, into public sculpture. So this is a public sculpture commission that he finished last year. This is to show you the scale of this work. It's one of his vases, one of his flowers in vases. It's made of aluminum with the photograph printed on it. but you can go around it, right? Because it's a three-dimensional public sculpture. And when you go around it, what you see is the back is that kind of rolled up piece of paper, right? This is all aluminum constructed, completely three-dimensional and sturdy and weatherproof work. But I love how he translated these little things that he makes in the studio with a glue gun and a piece of rolled up paper into that giant sculpture. So it shows both kind of a transparency as an artist, right? He's exposing his process, and also a lot of humor, I think. That's one of my favorite things that he's made. But in the exhibition, there's really kind of a celebration of this genre of still life, right? Why does he say he's something between a painter and a sculptor and a photographer? There's no painting in the work. The painting comes from the stuff he looks at, right? The stuff that he's inspired by. One of the works that he cites a lot, one of the artists that he cites a lot is Matisse, who made a lot of still lives. And this specifically, right? We see the vase, we see the fruit. You very much see these influences in Daniel Gordon's work. So he's a photographer, sculptor, who thinks about painting, who thinks about where he sits in relation to the history of painting. The last thing I want to tell you, just to make it very clear, the Photoshop element of his work, where he uses the free transform and all that stuff, that he only does when he's making the elements that he is going to photograph. So he'll change the color of something, he'll change the scale of something, print it, cut it out, and then make an object out of it, like this green watermelon, for example. But once he has clicked his shutter, once he has taken the picture, he no longer does any Photoshop work to his photograph. So in that way, there's kind of a photographic integrity. What you see is what you get. This is what really was in front of his camera when he hit click. He doesn't change the colors later. He doesn't do any editing digitally. He just prints out the photos that his camera captured. As you saw, he kind of works in front of the camera until he gets his composition just right, and then he shoots it. Here's another detail from that picture. And I brought you some more pictures from his Instagram account. That's really fun. He documents his process there a lot. These are, in the middle, you see the original cup that he photographed. So that is a ceramic object in the middle. On one side on the right side, you see his version that's made of flat pieces of paper kind of glued to a cylinder of paper to make them stand up. That's it from the other side. And on the left side is his sculpture that he made, a three-dimensional sculpture covered by the images. So just a little take on all the different ways in which he translates images into his photographs. So, and here's his messy studio. So this is it for today. I'm happy to answer any questions. Wayne, if you see anything.
Yeah, let's try to get a couple of real quick ones in here. These were fun, just as advertised. God, people really responded well to Gordon in particular as just really being cool. And I'm glad you pointed out exactly why, like Photoshop's not a bad word, right? No. It's not an insult to say he used it as part of his medium, yet there is sort of this connotation today. I mean, I'll never look at a pair of used Nikes or a battery again. I mean, it's just so realistic looking. But how are other artists relating to Gordon's work, and using the P word of Photoshop in his process?
It's not a P word at all. I mean, I think especially, artists born in the last, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, it's become a tool. It's just a tool. I mean, Photoshop is not going to make you a better artist, just like buying expensive brushes is not going to make you a better artist. It's just a tool that people use to make their to make their work. He is also kind of varied between photographing and film and digitally. Actually, during the pandemic, he started filming with a digital camera, shooting with a digital camera because he didn't have access to his printer. So you kind of do what you got to do.
Got it. Let's talk about Ada real quick. There was a question about her age in that the very last shot, and I know this is Katz's favorite subject.
Yeah.
What's like the age range? You said I think one of the early shots was of her as an actress in Yiddish theater. Is that what you said? And
no, that was his mother.
That was the mother. Sorry.
His mother was an actress in the Yiddish theater. Ada was, when he met her, Ada was a biologist, a kind of a huge star in the academic world. And I think, let's see, I'll go back. I believe, they're both living. I believe that the first images, she must be in her, 30s. Mm-hmm. And goes up to she's almost 90 now.
Wow.
Yeah, or 90. Yeah. So yeah, this is one of the earliest images. Maybe this is the first time he's painting her. 20s, 30s until now. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And a quick one on Avedon before we close out. There was an early question from Deborah about the printing process, just the size. Those things look like they could be billboard posters.
Oh, the murals. Something. Yes.
How do you like the Ginsburg family and the Marilyn in the multiple iterations? Is that multiple panels or one big panel?
No, so the Marilyn you see is not that huge in terms of, if you see it in scale on the wall, but that is all one piece of paper. And the Ginsburg mural, and by the way, the Metropolitan Museum, I think, still has up a small exhibition of just the mural photographs that I think you can still see, if I'm not mistaken. It's in one of the smaller galleries, and it has about 5 or 6 of them. So as you see, this one is in 2 sheets. And literally what he did, he shot them with a large format camera. So it's not a small kind of point and shoot. It's a big camera on a tripod that has a big film. So it has very high, what we call now resolution, or very high detail. And the way he printed it was in pieces, but literally he used a darkroom, the enlarger, the thing that projects the image onto the paper had to be taken way up to the ceiling to project an image that big on the paper. And then the paper, for those of you who know how black and white photography used to be developed in the lab, there's photosensitive paper. You take the enlarger, you shine a light through the negative onto the paper, and then you run the paper in these kind of plastic vats through a few chemicals that make the blacks and the whites and the grays. And all of this is done completely manually. This is chemistry on paper. So it really is a technological and a technical feat, as well as an artistic one.
Well, you took us on quite and the connections that you made between all of them really were remarkable. But I want to remind everyone of the great advice you just got from Gabriela. Don't buy expensive brushes. You can just use the cheap ones and still create art and make art like these artists did, with each in their own respective ways. Gabriela, as always, you please our team, you please the artists themselves by giving them an opportunity to be really fully understood in the context of other artists as well. We're so grateful for you, and just want to share a prayer as you head out on a bit of a hafsakah for a higher purpose, another artistic.
I'm going on maternity leave, guys. That's what
maternity leave. Exactly. So, B'sha'a tova, we'll be thinking of you on your break for short or long, and wish you the best. And with thanks, we'll be back again this Sunday. You don't have to even wait. This is like a 2-for week here at AIFL. We've got a great program with our partners and friends at Israel Legacy Central, who are experts on legacy giving in Israel with nonprofits that are having great impact. And we have a feature organization from Israel that does humanitarian work. They are called Natan, and they send delegations from everywhere, from Ukraine to Nepal. And we're going to hear from Israeli volunteers who go work on these humanitarian missions all over the world. So come back to us just in a couple of days on Sunday. And Gabriela, come back to us. B'sha'a tova.
Thank you. We already have dates lined up for the fall. I will be back when I'm back from maternity leave. Just real quick, someone here asked if any of these shows were still open. Unfortunately, none of them are open, except for if you go to the Metropolitan Museum's website, I think maybe you can still catch the Avedon murals. It's a small show. It's not what we saw here. But I will send AIFL the links to all the shows that we saw, which you can get from them.
Thanks so much, Gabriela. Great to be with everyone. See you hopefully on Sunday. להתראות. Bye.
להתראות.